Beyond the Wrench with Jay Goninen from Find a Wrench.
Welcome to another episode of Beyond the Wrench. My name is Jay Goninen, and today I get one of my favorite guests and favorite people in the industry to join me again. I don't know how I tricked him into doing this, but Tanner Brandt, welcome back to the show. Of course, everybody knows Tanner, it feels like, but for those of you that don't, Tanner is the owner of Diag Clinic, a new name. This is really throwing me for a loop here, Tanner.
No worries at all. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming back on. So I conned you on to getting back on here again, and I just won because you bring so much insight and so much of just knowledge about not only just independent shops but dealerships, and you've got kind of a little bit of a background in a whole bunch of stuff. And one of the things we wanted to dive into today, and I think it's more just because of my lack of knowledge than anything, is diving into mobile diagnostics. And, you know, that's your specialty. And I guess I want to start with, why did you get into mobile diagnostics in the first place?
Sure. So probably about 5 years ago now, roughly, I learned that there was guys doing this and going out and diagnosing vehicles for people. I had always, liked the diagnostic side of it, and always, kind of focused on that when I was at a shop working. I did mechanical repair as well, but always was better at diagnostics and enjoyed that side of it. And the more that I started getting involved in the training side of the industry, that was when I learned that, there was a bunch of guys that attended training all the time. And what those guys did was mobile diagnostics. They went out to shops, and if a shop was stumped, they would diagnose the car for them and then leave, and the shop would fix it. They'd go on to the next one, or if it needed to be programmed, that they would then program the vehicle. So about 5 years ago, when I realized that, I said, I think I could do that. I had to put myself in a position to be able to do that. I'm originally from upstate New York, and that's where I was at the time. So I had a mobile repair business up there and did stuff for construction companies and fleets, and kind of just all kinds of different things, from tractors to cars to tow behind construction equipment, you name it. And I got involved in that because it was, something nobody could diagnose that stuff, because it was all pretty much equipment that came from Europe and whatnot. But trying to, do mobile diagnostics on vehicles, getting into wiring harnesses and things like that with there's 2 feet of snow is not great. So,
right.
Had to put myself into a position of moving someplace warmer that, had a market for it, still had a lot of shops, and had a need for it where I could do it without snow.
So how'd you end up in South Carolina? Obviously South Carolina is a gorgeous place, but you just pick up and drive down to South Carolina and there you are?
So sort of. In 2013, I came down to South Carolina to help a shop for 6 months before I went back home to New York. So I came down here, rented a house for 6 months, helped a shop with some projects, and then went home. So always liked the area since then. When we decided that we were going to move from New York, my now wife, she was my girlfriend at the time, basically we kind of decided that we were going to go someplace warm. So originally we wanted to go look in North Carolina, because that was, I had a background in racing as well. So really wanted to be in like Mooresville area, be back into the racing thing. Very fortunate for me, a friend from a past life when I was on a racing team, she found out that we were actually there looking at houses with a realtor she saw through my Facebook, and called me and told me, hey, if you are considering buying down here, you need to come to the race shop. So it was a woman by the name of Elena Long. She unfortunately is no longer with us. She passed away, last year, two years ago, possibly now. But her and her husband, Tom Long, owned Long Road Racing, which was the Mazda Miata MX-5 Cup cars. They were the sole provider for that up until last year. But they called me, Elena called me and said, hey, stop down at the race shop. We should talk about, this area, and I should talk to you about pay in the area, so you have an idea of whether this is a good idea and whether you should be looking at houses. So she was very honest with me and explained to me the pay in the area and what the pay wasn't, I should say.
Yeah.
So given what I wanted to do, she thought that it would be tough to, find a shop for the time being to get me on my feet in that area. So we spent a week there, looked at houses, and then came down to Greenville and started looking at houses down here. Also looked in, we looked around Lake Norman area, North Carolina. We looked in Greenville and then around Lake Lure, which is kind of middle of nowhere in the mountains. So wasn't a lot in that area. So that was why we didn't choose there. And once we went downtown to Greenville, my wife kind of fell in love with it. She got a job offer, months after we moved, so it worked out. But I pretty much came down, worked for a shop for, I think, probably 6 months before I started the business down here. So it just worked out well. The area is beautiful, quite a bit of money because of BMW North America, ZF, Drexelmeyer. There's a whole bunch of different manufacturing here, so decent amount of money and tons of shops. So it worked out well.
So the racing thing fascinates me, right? Because that was. You know this about me, like I had a racing background too, and it's just, I don't think that ever gets out of your system. Like once you're kind of infected with that bug, it's just there for the rest of your life. I was so close to going to, is it Catawba Valley Community College?
Yep.
In Hickory or somewhere like,
up in that area. Yep.
Yeah. So I was, I mean, packing my bags ready to go there, and then I chose to go somewhere else. But I loved their fabrication program, and I loved everything that they were doing. I think they put a lot of guys on like Hooters Pro Cup teams and stuff like that, and that was always what I wanted to do. And I'm always jealous of people that actually did it, because I think it's such a cool thing to do, such a brave thing to do, and to be able to immerse yourself in that racing community is pretty damn awesome.
The thing I miss about it is the family atmosphere. I think the repair side of the industry could learn a lot from that. When I was on the race team, I mean, there was really never any drama. I did it for a little over 2 years, and it was what then was the Grand Am series. Now it's the Rolex series, or IMSA is what it is now. So, it was neat. It was BMWs, and it was, fun, and I enjoyed it. Unfortunately, I graduated high school and went into college during the recession, so pretty much showed up one day and the doors were locked, and that was that. Just like most of the people in racing during that time. So because of that, I couldn't pursue that at that time. I pretty much, again, the contacts I had from that part of my life when I graduated, I called down to North Carolina to some of these areas or some of these teams. I'm like, do I have a chance at this? Should I even pursue this? And they're like, yeah, we just laid everyone off, so might as well find something else. So that's how I kind of went from racing then to the repair side. I do, I miss it, and I wish that the repair side could learn, the family side of it and stuff. But with that said, there is a lot of ups and downs, I would say, in that industry. I just finished actually last night, ironically, a book by Kelly Earnhardt called Drive.
I want to read it. I've not read it yet.
So there, if you follow that part of racing, Justin Allgaier is one of the junior motorsports drivers. His sponsor, Rick Brandt, is somebody that I know. And
know him with the ag stuff, Brandt? Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. So ironically, I have no relation to him. My last name is the same, but I met him through going to races and stuff, and I was just got very lucky, and that's how I had met Rick. So my brothers are pretty good friends with him and stuff. But so I saw that he had shared it, so I went and read that book, and I had been waiting to read it once he shared it. So I finally found it actually right before Christmas in a Barnes and Noble. So anyways, I just finished reading it, and it's she talks about the different things that happen there, where maybe you pretty much have to lay off, one whole part of your company because either that team dissolves or, something happens, you switch away, maybe you get out of a series or something or move into a series. So you're talking like massive layoffs. You might lay off 50 people at a time. Those 50 people now are looking for a job when there's only 40 teams or whatever there. So hard to stay involved in, and it seems like the people that are in it are there for their life. So
Yeah, there's I know I'm a little off topic here, but there's some. I've talked to some folks in NASCAR specifically that going to that single chassis in 2000 is supposed to be, I think, next year. It might be a bit of a challenge for some of those teams because I think there's going to be not enough work to go around for a lot of those guys, and that stinks.
yeah, well, maybe they'll come and join. Maybe they'll get into diagnostics.
Yeah, yeah. You could just set up in Mooresville and just start teaching around there. Yeah. So on the mobile diagnostics side, what is it like? Your typical customer is a shop, right? You're not going to an end user. You're going to maybe a shop that can't figure something out. Am I right?
Yep. So myself and I would say a majority of the mobile diagnostic guys do not deal with consumers. We only deal with the shop. Some of them, might deal with a consumer here or there, but basically a shop calls me and says, "Hey," I guess I would say it depends on the shop. So some shops don't call until they're really stumped on a vehicle and they've tried a couple different things. Other shops that don't want to deal with that may call and say, "Hey, this car came in, it's got check engine light on, we looked at it, we don't think it's something we can do, we'd just rather have you look at it," and then the guys can get back on it and fix it. So it goes either way. Sometimes I prefer it to go the second way. Sometimes when parts get changed prior to us getting there, the waters can be a little bit muddy, and with vehicles today, it's very tough with used parts and used modules, and sometimes they may not know that, and that can cause other issues, and it ends up costing them more money in the long run. So definitely prefer it the second way. But yeah, don't really deal with the consumer side for the mere fact that, well, we're there to support a shop, so we don't want to compete with the shops. That's kind of the goal, and the fact that I don't do any repair anymore. So if I was to go to a consumer, I could tell them what was wrong with it. I'm not going to be the one repairing it regardless, so then they'd have to repair it or still take it to a shop. And then obviously if the shop doesn't know who I am, maybe not trusting my diagnosis or something, wanting to diagnose it themselves. So just easier to deal directly with the shop than the consumer.
Do you battle pride with other techs? Like, and when I say that, like somebody that maybe doesn't feel like they got enough time for it, or they just, I think everybody's got their butt kicked by something. And
Yep.
I think it is a tough pill to swallow sometimes for some techs if they can't figure it out on their own.
Sure. So I would say that it depends on the situation. I have certainly one shop in particular, I won't mention names or anything, they struggled with a vehicle, and I got called by, it was actually a used car dealer that sold the vehicle. 6 months after they sold it, the car had an issue. Lady took it to the shop. They threw parts at it for a few weeks, couldn't figure it out. She called the car dealer. He was willing to pay me to go over and look at it. Okayed it with the shop. I got out there and they pretty much met me in their front office and said, "We don't need your help. We know what we're doing and we don't want you to look at it." So, that can happen. Most of the time though, I sit down, if there's that issue, I'll sit down with the technician that's worried about it, explain to him what I do and why I do what I do, and then offer that once I figure it out, I'll bring him over and show him what I found and how to find it the next time. I'm all for, if the technician wants to learn, if the shop wants to learn, helping them learn. I've do hands-on training for shops, and obviously teach for WorldPack as well. So my big thing is to help the shop, help the technician. But if they don't want to learn, they don't want to know anything, that's fine too. I'll look at it and just tell them what's wrong with it. So
yeah, I think that's cool. Like that you would take the time to sit down and even from the standpoint of, I've seen some really good techs struggle with maybe even something where they're overlooking something simple and they get frustrated by it. And we've all had it where you're better off just to take a step back and get another set of eyes on it. So I think there's if they understand that piece, I mean, and especially if you're willing to kind of show them what you found and not, not stick it in their face, it's truly trying to help them.
Right. And I think the big thing too that I try to explain is I'm there to help. I'm not there to tell you this is what's wrong. You guys are, dumb. You should have found this. I'll never do that to a shop. I wouldn't like it done to me, so they certainly wouldn't want it done to them. And I think the big thing too is you'll find, and this now because you've gone to some conferences and stuff, that most of the guys that are really good are always humble. The guys that I've learned from have all been super humble. So you're not going to deal with, if you call a mobile diag guy, I mean, pretty much every mobile diagnostic guy across the US is somebody that I know. And I would say that the majority of them are all very humble and very kind and aren't ever going to, say anything bad. And they're just going to be there to help you, and willing to teach, if somebody wants to learn.
I was surprised by that. And if I'm being just transparent or like honest with you, because a lot of these mobile diag guys have a right to be, maybe a little bit arrogant or a little bit, they're the best of the best. They're really, really damn good at what they do. And you're so spot on. All of them are so extremely kind and humble and just not, I've never had a bad experience with any of them. And even, calling you or calling, I'm trying to think off the top of my head. You've introduced me to so many people, but I've called a few of them. Mike Reynolds, I think. There's a few of them where you just reach out and they're just completely open. Like they'll tell you, what they think, and they give you whatever time you need. I mean, it's really, really impressive.
Right. It's, I think the big thing too is we diagnose such difficult problems on a daily basis that we know what it's like to get our butt kicked. I mean, to say that we don't get our butt kicked is, would be lying. So we know how tough it can be, and we, understand that you can't know everything. I mean, the stuff that we look at, I talk with shops about this from time to time too, is they're like, you see such different stuff than what we see, and we wouldn't need to know that. But then once in a while they'll get a car that kicks their butt, and I'm like, well, here you go. Here's your chance where you might have needed to know something. So we see just crazy stuff. So when we get our butt kicked, it sucks, but we do the same thing. At the end of the day, most of us, again, know each other, call each other. So if I'm stumped, the first thing I'm going to do is go, I'm going to come back in a couple of days, let me talk it over with some guys. And I call all the guys. I'm like, has anybody ever seen this? What am I doing wrong? What don't I know about this system? And I would say that's kind of the difference too between a mobile diagnostic guy and somebody that, doesn't specialize in diagnostics. I would say is the network,
Sure.
And I think that also comes down to how we learn, being able to ask questions. If a technician has a pride issue and isn't willing to ask questions, isn't willing to have somebody else look at it, they're never going to learn. I get beat up enough that I know that I need to call people and ask somebody that knows more than me. I mean, there's a lot of guys older than me that have done this for 20 or 30 years, and I call them and they're like, oh yeah, you got to do this. Didn't you know that? You haven't done one of these? And I'm like, no. So yeah, we're used to getting beat up, so we don't want to beat up the shop.
Well, so how often have you just been completely stumped? Like you go in and you're like, there's got to be a couple stories where something it just whooped you.
Sure. So perfect example. A couple weeks ago, I looked at a car for a large used car dealership, like I would say CarMax size. It wasn't a CarMax dealer, but another dealer like that. And when I got there, they had an issue with a transmission that they had put in that the park reverse neutral indicator didn't work, so the transmission wouldn't shift out of gear. What I did not know is that they had been swapping parts from other cars on their lot, which it was a Global A vehicle, which those of you that don't know what Global A is, basically you can't put used modules in or you'll corrupt things and cause problems. So they didn't tell me, they had put an engine in this like months prior, and then it went back to the customer, was fine. They put a transmission in it, had an issue, took it out, put another transmission in it, still had the issue, then started swapping parts, and I got called. And the first thing I noticed when I was there is it had some codes for intake air temperature sensor, and some other circuit codes. So I'm like, well, I picked the simplest thing first to look at. That's, just part of my diagnostic process. So I looked at those, and the first thing I did was, I'm like, all right, this circuit's got a problem. I went to it, checked it, powers and grounds, didn't have any power, went to the fuse box, and I'm like, there's no fuses here. There's also no terminals where the fuses are. So, why does this have the wrong fuse box in it? And I didn't know anything about the car at that point. So I started asking, and, they're all, we didn't do anything with it. And I'm like, look, I don't know if you did something with this or not, but the fuse box is wrong. I need the fuse box before I can do anything else. Like, I'm done here today until you get the correct fuse box. And finally, one of the guys is like, oh yeah, 2 weeks ago when they started swapping parts, they put a fuse box from another car. I'm like, well, where's the other car? Because that one's got the wrong fuse box in it too now. So they swapped that back. And, long story short, I went round and round and round with, they had the wrong computer in it. They had, just a bunch of different stuff. And I did eventually, diagnose it correctly. Once we got all of that out of the way, it ended up the internal of the transmission, the TCM was bad and wouldn't read. I kind of assumed, they told me that the pan bolts were loose on it. I sort of assumed the junkyard that had it may have hit the TCM because the plug is at the bottom, right about where a set of forks would hit. So my guess is if they pulled the pan, that's what they would have found. But they ended up, the junkyard warrantied out the transmission, car was fixed, it went away. But so when you get something like that, it's tough. I talk about the importance too of, being able to not misdiagnose a vehicle and, following a diagnostic process. But when you get something that's got multiple issues, then the waters get muddied and your diagnostic process sort of goes out the window. So that's not to say either that, I don't misdiagnose stuff. I probably touch 300 to 320 cars a year or something like that. And I keep a running list of what I misdiagnose. And my goal is, if I misdiagnose something, that means I'm either not good at it or I don't understand that system. I need to get more training on it. So that list normally has, a couple cars by the end of the year. It doesn't typically have more than that. So out of 300, a few.
A couple cars. You know how to make me feel like crap, Tanner. Out of all those cars, you got a couple.
Yeah, I had one last year on the list. So last year was a pretty good year.
That's a hell of a year. But I think that goes to, while you're talking there, one of the things that stuck out to me is that could be a glaring endorsement for WorldPack or anybody that does training, because it really is that if you have a shop manager that doesn't believe in training, that's like A1 right there of like just simple knowledge of a system that could have saved you all kinds of time and money and headaches. And it doesn't, it's not like you're going to go put that money into training and then you're going to see it the next day that it's just going to automatically flip. And that's where we, like, the training of these techs is just so important. I think we miss that a lot.
Yeah, and that's a big thing. And what's very, very interesting, and this goes for all mobile diagnostic guys, we talk about this constantly. There's two questions we get asked all the time, every one of us. A, how do I do what you do? And B, how much would it cost to hire you? So the second one, typically I just always kind of blow off and I'm like, I'm not sure, but I'm not looking right now. And I don't want to say I don't want to hurt their feelings, but typically that's what it comes down to. They don't, they don't understand what the cost would be to do something like that. But then that, directly relates to the first one. The cost of hiring somebody like us would go directly to training each year. So, how do I do what you do, or how does my tech learn what you do? I've done in-shop training that was maybe, an hour here or an hour there that a shop wanted to do. And then they call me, 2 weeks later and they're like, hey, we're stumped, we need to do this. And then the, shop owner may come to me and go, didn't they learn this when they took that training with you? And I'm like, no, we literally, maybe went over how to use a specific scan tool, maybe how to use a specific scope or something like that. And they don't really understand either that, in 4 hours time or 8 hours time, maybe they take one class and they're like, oh, they should know how to do this. I specifically, for when I really, really got into training in mobile diagnostics, for a course of probably 3 to 4 years, probably 3 years 3 years total. And then the first year was kind of when I started to spend money, but then when I got really heavy into it, 3 years total of probably $10,000 a year I spent in training, probably roughly 150, 160 hours a year, maybe more.
Wow. That kind of shows the level of dedication you need. And really, I think what I love about you is how dedicated you are to your craft, right? Like you are trying to get better. You know how much this stuff changes. And like you said, it's not, you can't take a 4 hour class once a year and expect to cover all the systems and everything. It really is you have to be intentional about it. You have to budget it in. If you're a shop out there that wants to really take this seriously, you got to budget. You got to plan for it. You got to sign them up in advance. And it's a really tedious part, especially when you start adding more and more people to the fold. It takes time. It takes, we say it on the recruiting side, like when a shop wants somebody, if they need them today, they should have been looking like 3 or 4 months ago. It's kind of the same thing with training, where if they need that training, they probably should have had it, a while back. Because if you don't get it then you're falling even further behind on the even more current stuff.
Exactly. And, trying to understand sending your techs to training and finding the training for them. One of the things I see is, sometimes they'll look at training, they'll be like, oh man, that's really expensive, or, oh, the guy doesn't want to go. He wants to, stay home with his family and stuff. And I get that. And obviously this year it's been good for that. They can just take the training online.
Sure.
But that's the big difference, is you've got to have somebody, if they want to do diagnostics or they want to become a mobile diagnostic technician, you've got to have somebody that's willing to get the training and willing to put the time in. I have one of my shops here, phenomenal shop and phenomenal technician. The guy used to be a trainer for AC Delco, so he's just like me. He owns a European shop now. I use his shop for a lot of case studies. He and I talk about it every time I'm there. The difference is, he and I, when we're go home at night, we're watching a YouTube video, or we're reading a book, or we're on Diagnostic Network or somewhere. That's, I don't want to say it's my hobby, but it pretty much is.
Yeah.
To get to a point, and some people don't want to get to that point with they want a job and not a career, I would say. I mean, you've got to make time for family, obviously, too. I pretty much try to take my weekends off if I can, unless obviously I have an event like this past weekend.
Sure.
But I try to take weekends off and, not really answer my phone too much. And I don't work on the weekends. I, try to go hiking or mountain biking or whatever to take some time off it. But I don't really have a hobby outside of this. The, tool and equipment stuff and training stuff, that's what I enjoy. If I'm sitting watching YouTube, I'm still typically watching something about cars or about, tools and equipment, things like that. So
yeah,
if, again, if you want to have a job, that's one thing. I see that a lot, where people are like, this is a job, I don't really want anything outside of it. But I would say, if you want a career, and you want to make good money in the automotive industry, then you've got to look at the automotive industry as a career and, go about it that way. From the shops that you deal with, good shops that, have hired coaches and stuff, those guys, the business guys, that's all they think about. They're not, when they sit at home at night, they're reading a business book or they're listening to a business podcast. That's all those guys do.
Well, and I think that goes, that's any profession, right? You're always going to have that top 2%, or, the people that ingrain themselves in the industry and truly view it as a, I don't know, like a craft, and you're trying to continually perfect that craft, and you're trying to get, better. And I think even when you're evaluating a tech, if you want, if you're a manager, or if you're a tech that's out there right now and you're like, how do I get better? Like maybe my independent shop that I work for, my dealership, they have me down on the list on training and I can't ever get training. There's opportunities out there for you to learn on your own. And I think there's some of it where you just got to have the want to, you gotta want to go do it. And it's just, that's every industry, every profession. I think there's people that, when they take it seriously, they read. That had such a profound impact on my life, was when I had a boss at one point that just, he's like, how are you not reading? Like you're not reading, whatever. And then I went to a conference, and the conference said, if you if you read a book a month, you're above 99.5% of college graduates, not of everybody, college graduates. And so you look for advantages and how you can get better in your career. And that's what you do it times 10, like that. You're always looking for that way to improve yourself. And I think for those young techs out there, especially, like if you want somebody to look after, one, you should connect with Tanner on LinkedIn or somewhere and find him through WorldPack or, whatever, because he just brings so much to the table in regard to this subject specifically. But two, I mean, there's opportunity to learn out there, isn't there, Tanner? I mean, it's not like you can't just sit on your hands and say, hey, the shop's not giving me any training.
Exactly. I mean, you got to reach out and see what's out there for training. And the big thing that I talk about too is figure out what training you need. The biggest thing I see with people that start coming to training when we get them involved is they'll go to a class and they'll be like, I didn't really learn anything. One example, I have a real good friend. I won't mention his name, but he'll know who he is. He's a dealer technician, and the first time he came to training, I'm like, at the end of the day, I'm like, oh, what do you think? It's the first time you're here. He's like, I didn't really learn anything. I'm like, what classes did you take? And he took all the classes on the manufacturer for the dealer that he worked at. And I'm like, you've already been through all those classes. I'm like, that's not what you take. You take what you don't know. You work on used cars there. And he's like, well, yeah. I'm like, so take something that doesn't have to do with that manufacturer. So, the rest of the weekend, that's what he did. And then he learned a lot. So, you want
to thinking, right? Like the thinking and like you talked about the diagnostic process. I know you and I talked about this before, but reading that article, who just wrote that article in Motor Age? It was so good. Brandon Steckler.
Yep.
And like the diagnostic process, and like it's just that kind of stuff, the thinking through problems and thinking through, having a plan when you go in. And it's not just plugging in a scan tool and expecting that it's going to tell you everything you need to know. It's knowing the other stuff. And I don't know, that always gets me fired up, but like, that, can you talk to that a little bit? Like the diagnostic process, because I think you know what article I'm talking about, don't you?
Yeah. So, and Brandon's, one of my best friends. So one thing is he and I both share a mentor. I mean, his mentor was Jim Morton, and Jim's helped me a lot through the years. We've all learned diagnostic process through guys like Jim, through guys like John Thornton, or one of the ones I learned a lot from was Mark Warren, my boss now. That was always a big subject that he covered. Bernie Thompson covers it. It's something that you learn through training. And I think the most interesting thing for me, and not to knock these guys when I talk about it, but that wasn't something I learned in high school automotive. It wasn't something I learned in college automotive. And I would say the reason for that is, neither my high school instructor, as good as he was, or my college instructors, I had great instructors, but they weren't involved in this side of, the training thing. And most of the diagnostic process, most of the high-end training like that comes from these aftermarket training events and these guys that, have been mobile diag guys for 20 years, and they know what works and what doesn't work. I just helped, if you know of Shopware, the shop management system, I just helped with that. I had approached Carolyn Coklitz, the owner of it. She's a really, really great friend of mine, and also another person that's a phenomenal technician too. A lot of people know her as a business owner, doesn't know she has a shop, and she was exactly like I was, like hugely involved in training, and that's how she got started. So, but I had approached her with Shopware. I said, hey, I want to build out these diagnostic process charts in the program. So she built some of them out, and then I built some of them out, and I think some other people had a hand in it. But that's stuff that you don't see out there because it's not taught by a manufacturer. It's not taught in school. So it's just such an interesting thing. And when I approached her with that idea, she's like, this is phenomenal. I love this idea. And so she just ran with it. And it's such an important thing to learn. That specific project that I did, or, had approached her with, is I approach every single, no start, no crank vehicle the same way. I approach every cranking no start the same way, every single cylinder misfire the same way. And I write that down and I follow that process every single time. But that's not something that, I should say, I came up with my process on my own. Every single one of us that's a mobile guy, you'll find, if you ask them, every single one of them's got a different process. They do stuff in different orders, but you have to learn how to do the testing to then come up with the process. So Brandon's one, he's phenomenal with that, and he's a trainer and does classes for us, does classes for CarQuest, and that's his specialty. He's a phenomenal diagnostic technician. So you've got to be able to get out and go to those classes, and you've really got to look for those classes, I would say, because if you're somebody that's at a shop and you're like, maybe I'm going to throw them under the bus a little bit here. Maybe Snap-on offers a class, and that's all you go to. Most of the time, their classes, going to be geared towards whatever piece of equipment it's on, which isn't a bad thing, but they're not out selling a diagnostic class. They're not out selling, stuff like that. So if that's the only people that come to you, then that's all you're going to see. So you really got to go out and talk, look and see what else is out there. YouTube has been a huge thing. So you can find out about guys through YouTube. You can find out about stuff going on through YouTube or through Facebook or through Diagnostic Network, and then just get yourself out there. The shop doesn't necessarily have to pay for it. Obviously, let's say I paid for it, for pretty much the whole first half of my career. I did have one shop that I worked for right before I moved away. He was the last shop I worked at in New York. I had a tool allowance each month, and I asked him, I said, can I take this tool allowance and pay for training instead of tools? I didn't really at that point have anything I needed. So I was using the tool allowance each month to pay for, put towards training each month. It didn't cover nearly what I spent, but it at least covered, some of it. Typically that covered the actual event. I would use that to pay for that, and then I would pay for travel out of my pocket.
So is there an opportunity, and just as somebody that went through tech school, and I was not good diagnostically. What's funny is that after I went and worked for Bobcat Company for quite a few years, I got better at it because I was forced to sit through a whole bunch of classes because I ran an affiliate center here. And so I would sit through a lot of classes, and some of the stuff was like a light switch. Once you listen to it a few times, you're like, oh, I was overcomplicating that to the max. Like that was way easier than I thought it was. But I almost feel like there would be an opportunity from maybe a tech school standpoint, foundationally, to have that principle up front of a diagnostic plan and saying, okay, you're going to go into this, you need to know what condition you're battling, and then if you have a consistent plan going into it, and then if you were able to start going and diving into the testing from there. And I'm just kind of spitballing here, but it was like to me, that's something that kind of clicked to me. It was like, okay, if I would have known why, doing a voltage drop matters, and I think the schools, they try to tell you that, but in my head, if it would have been like, okay, you have this process and you need to go do like this is why this is important. You're trying to verify that this is working and that this isn't working. And, I feel like we missed that part. Like we try to go into this advanced diagnostics, like right off the bat. Or even from a student standpoint, you're probably like, I don't need to know that basic electrical stuff. I'm going to go straight to, the scan tools and learn how to diagnose all this stuff. And, I think it's maybe a problem on both ends, but to me, I think that would have hit home with me so much better if I would have known, like, okay, there's a process to this. Right.
And so what's tough at a college and high school level too is there's so much that they're trying to cover, right? Even if a student has gone through high school automotive, when they get to college, you have students there that haven't. So they've still got to start from day one.
Right.
So they're trying to cover brakes, they're trying to cover suspension and, all the areas. And then if they're a NATEF school, they're trying to make sure that they're, taking care of that as well. So time is a big thing where they struggle that they don't have the time to get deeply involved, but at the same time, maybe they've got instructors too that are there as it's a job and it's not a career, and they're towards the end of that job, they're near retirement age and they're just they don't want to learn anything else. They want to teach what they know. So there's both sides of it. I think that students would do well to learn it. I think it would certainly help, but how they could incorporate it into the curriculum, I've thought a lot about, and maybe years from now, doing something with a training center outside of schools that kids can come to, because it really, the other side of it too is that they've got to have people there, obviously, that want to teach it or can teach it. And I have some, phenomenal instructors that I go to lunch with on a regular basis locally here, and then some in North Carolina too, that, they come to training all the time. They're there. There's, a few throughout the U.S., I would say, that I know personally that come to training all the time. Now, those guys could teach it. There's also several that I know that come to training, but they're stuck teaching the curriculum the way, organizations want it written. So, and I've seen two places that have somebody that they don't know. A perfect example, he's going to probably kill me for this one, but a good buddy of mine, Scott Schotten, college educator and phenomenal diagnostic technician, mobile diagnostic tech, and phenomenal trainer. We found a girl that went through his program that was, I forget how she came about. She was related to somebody else that we knew, and we realized through Facebook that she was one of his students. She had no clue that he was like a world-renowned trainer. So we pretty much all threw him under the bus, and we're like, hey, just so you know. And he's like, yeah, nobody at the college really knows what I do outside of this. So they had him here. He could have taught that, but they had no clue that that was what he did. So that was a kind of interesting thing. And we see that he wasn't the only one. I've seen it with other colleges where, they have this set curriculum they need to teach. And, if the instructor is humble and doesn't say anything that's, he has a background in diagnostics, they don't even know anything about it.
Yeah,
so,
that's we're trying to help with that on the WrenchWay side too, because we see that constantly. We're trying to get, communication not only with industry and schools, but within schools, like to try and get a little bit more progressive, because it does feel like a lot of stuff falls between the cracks. And I think at times it might be because frankly, the programs fall low on their priority list, right? And they're doing their thing over in that shop. We're going to leave them alone and not worry about it. So, we got about 10 minutes left. One of the things that I want to talk a little bit more in depth about is, to kind of circle back to the original part of our conversation, which was on that mobile diagnostic side. When we look at the future of mobile diagnostics, I think there's a little bit of both ends of the spectrum, where some people think it's going to take over everything. Some people think it's one example of an area where I think there's people that struggle to get their hands around it is this something that can work in the north, right? Like if it can work in cold weather climates, I think, in really isolating diagnostics from repair, right? Because I think they're really, really different when it comes to that exact question. Is that somewhat on base?
Yeah, 100% on base. So getting it to work in the north is hard. That was why I moved away. I mean, you can't look at a car out in 2 feet of snow. With that said, it will work if shops make room for it. They'd have to make room, have an area where a car could be pulled in. One side of that, is the collision side of it. But looking at, the future moving forward, ADAS stuff is something that some of the mobile guys are doing. Well, in the north or anywhere that it snows, you can't be outside in the snow doing that, because you can't mark the ground where you need to make your measurements, and obviously the car can't be covered with snow when you're doing it. So that's going to have to be moved inside. So it could be done. They have to think about how they do it. The other thing that's just interesting to look at is that division, I would say, between the repair side and the diagnostic side. I'll be the first to say that I've worked pretty hard through the years to kind of make that division known, that, look, there's a huge gap from, I would even say, in the guys at ASE, I love them, and they know I feel this way, that between a master tech and then a diagnostic tech, they do have the L1 test, and, some of my really good friends are the ones that have helped write the L1 test. And I think that's a phenomenal test, but you're still looking at, is somebody that is quote unquote a master technician, an A tech, a diagnostic tech? And the answer to that is no. So there's certainly a division between somebody doing repair work and doing diagnostic work. Now, can somebody be good at both? Yeah. I mean, I did it for years. I did anything from engines to brakes to tires to oil changes. And then, a day later I could be diagnosing a communication problem. So there's certainly guys that can do it, but there's also, it's gotten to a point in the career or in the industry, I would say, where they don't really have to. There's larger mobile diagnostic companies out there that are hiring people. There's also several OEMs that have figured out that, hey, we have a need for this. We're having issues with warranty problems. We should be building these, teams of diagnostic technicians. So there's a couple that are, in their infancy right now of doing that, but that have reached out and said, this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to put these teams together. Training departments too. Some of them are still trying to hire, more guys in their training departments. So there's gotten to be where that divide is, pretty pronounced, I guess I would say. And you're seeing now a lot of technicians that were like myself that did both, are kind of making that decision. Okay, do I enjoy the repair side more? Or do I, enjoy the diagnostic side more? And they're able to jump ship and go do something else. I think that as the future goes, some people have felt that mobile diagnostics will go away as, things like over-the-air updates and stuff like that for programming become a normal thing. I'm totally fine with that. The programming side of it, I'll be completely honest, drives me nuts because it constantly changes and you're at the mercy of, all of us are programming with factory tools. So, but if the factory tool has a problem, you're at the mercy of them. They're having staffing problems, especially during COVID. GM in particular, I had an issue a couple months ago that I called over there and I couldn't get anybody. So I called the director of North America for that program, and I'm like, I can't get anybody. I need an answer. And he's like, yeah, we don't have any staff. So, everybody's having staffing issues, not just us and, for technicians. So with that said, I would welcome the over-the-air updates and stuff. So that side of the mobile diagnostic stuff will eventually go away, but there's still going to have to be somebody that knows how to diagnose the car. Now, will guys like myself eventually become employed by manufacturers and, the manufacturers start building these massive teams to where that's where guys like me end up? I think that's a possibility. I mean, I think looking at, the one in particular that I know that's doing it right now, it's a, pretty big manufacturer. And I know of several others that, have done stuff like that through the years. So, or, companies like I work for now, WorldPac, will WorldPac, expand? Will these other training companies expand? Will, let's say, just Toyota out of the blue, will Toyota,
Sure.
expand their training department and all, all of a sudden need more? So I think the future for mobile diagnostics is still going to be there, but I think the bigger thing is that, the future of just a diagnostic tech, I think you're going to see, other people trying to get them versus just a repair shop or dealership. And I think you're going to see them kind of move away from, I guess I would say, the regular repair. I look at, the amount of things that I'm involved in. Will I ever go back to an independent repair shop and pick up a wrench? Unfortunately, probably not. I mean, it's just not something, A, I don't have time now, but B, if I were to say tomorrow, hey, I'm done with training and I'm done with mobile diagnostics, there's enough other things out there with what I do and companies that I've been involved with that would prefer to, just grab somebody like that. So, and all the rest of the mobile diag guys are kind of the same. So will that divide ever go away in the future? I don't think so.
I don't either. I think it's not like this technology is getting less complicated, right? Like it just continues to grow, continues to evolve. And I watched a couple of videos, I think on YouTube, where you had a couple techs freaking out because they're like, oh, this electric car thing is going to take over our jobs and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, you're just going to have to adapt. It's not going to, there's still going to be plenty of work. That's my opinion. They're still going to break.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They definitely are still going to break. So a good buddy of mine, Seth Thorson, he's been, diving right in with Tesla stuff. And looking at, there's certainly some things you got to learn. My good buddy Isaac, he taught this weekend a hybrid class. Isaac's a hybrid and EV guru. Isaac and myself both went through, ZF was doing a project a while back, and Isaac and I both had to get certified to help with that. So Isaac and I are both certified high voltage experts, which means that we could go to Europe and teach the high voltage program. The program that we took is the same program that BMW has to use to train their engineers to work on their hybrids. So there's ways to get certified in it. There's ways to learn that technology and then move forward with that. And like you said, they're going to break. And even on a repair side, they're still, Seth found with the Teslas, they're still having issues with, seals on where a CV shaft goes in and leaking fluid out of that, or, ball joint issues or tie rod issues. Brakes are going to become an interesting thing though, because brakes are going to last, 100, 120,000 miles because of regenerative braking. So, will companies like Brakes Plus and stuff, if we ever go into full on, EV, will they take a hit? Yeah, but they'll adapt.
Right.
And so will all these other companies. So electric vehicles is an interesting thing, but they're still going to break. And I guess the thing to think about too is, we do see drivability issues. Drivability is something I always enjoyed on a gas engine, but I can tell you right now, 99% of my mobile business has nothing to do with drivability. So much of it is electrical stuff, immobilizer stuff, and that's not going to change on an electric car. It's still going to have a key that goes in that needs to be recognized. It's still going to have, blend door motors that are moving for heating positions. It's still going to have, odometer functions and programming functions. If an over-the-air update fails, it's still going to cause problems. So the electrical side is never going to go away. And that's, what most guys like myself, specialize in. So
Yeah.
it's certainly not going to, I don't think, take jobs away. I do think that knowing, that there could be less, brakes being put on and maybe less tires being put on and stuff like that, our technician's going to need to learn the electrical side of it. Yeah, I mean, that's certainly something that they're going to have to do. But is it so unobtainable that people can't do it? No, it's certainly, you can learn it. You're certainly going to have to put the time in to do it and go seek out the training for it, because unfortunately I don't feel, what you're going to get in 2 years of college for that are going to be adequate, just because they don't have time.
Right.
But you can certainly find the training for it. I mean, there's all kinds of EV and electric vehicle training out there right now already.
So we know what our next podcast is going to be about.
Uh-oh.
No, this electric vehicle thing is fascinating to me, and I think we could have a whole episode on that. But I think it does really play into the mobile diagnostics, and I think, as you're seeing like your community of mobile diagnosticians, that's a tough word. We need an easier word for that, I think.
Yeah.
As that community grows, I mean, it's cool to see all of you extremely talented guys out there and gals doing this. And I think it shows the way of another path, that if somebody wants to go that route, that there's going to be a ton of opportunity out there for that. And so I think we're out of time, but as usual, we could use about another 4 hours to go on, Tanner. But I just think this is a fascinating subject, and I don't think this is the last time that you and I will be talking about this, because I think there's so much to it. And as we dive into it, and really from the training side to the actual diagnostics to the, if there's a tech that might be interested in going that route, how do they start to get into it? I just think there's so much more that we can talk about that we can't cover in an hour. So hopefully we'll get you back on again at some point soon.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, thank you again for joining me. We love having you. You're a huge friend of Find a Wrench and WrenchWay. We appreciate everything you do for the industry, and look forward to the next one.
Well, thank you very much, and thanks for having me.